Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture podcast. So that's a wrap for my 2020 trout season on my home river. It's been a memorable one, obviously, for so many different reasons. The river's been good to me in some respects and not so good in others. The trout fishing has been amazing, and I've had a proper kicking on the salmon, but it doesn't make me love it even less. I've got one last trip coming for salmon with Emma. If the weather holds. We've had so much rain, so I'm sure you're aware that I've a suspicion that it's going to be rained off. That's my sense anyway, but we'll wait and see what happens with that. Then it's on to grayling, and grayling for me takes a slightly different pace, shorter days. They're a lot more social. I usually meet up with friends and we have a good breakfast beforehand and talk, and it usually gets to about 10 o'clock and somebody suggests, should we go fishing then? So that's usually how those days play out. One of the things I've noticed this year, though, is fishing alone. And I think part of that is having been a fishing guide for so long that I spent so much time on the river with people. And this year I've really enjoyed just fishing on my own. And it's been fantastic fun. The dog comes along with me. I've enjoyed company with friends, obviously, but fishing alone has been a really special thing. And I've really enjoyed doing a lot more of that this year. And I think that's probably going to be a little bit more of that as well. Highlights. What are my highlights? Well, there have been some wonderful ones from a trout perspective. Emma hooking salmon, landing salmon, everything else. But one of them's a really interesting one for me, and I've alluded to it in the past. But I was fishing with a friend, and he hooked and landed a very sizable trout for the West Country, and I actually weighed it once I'd pulled the net out of the water so that we could weigh it properly, and it was 3.25 pounds. And the fish, as I was trying to get him to pose for a photo, because it was a memorable fish, it slid from his hands and swam off. And he said to me, I said, man, I didn't get the photo. And he said, doesn't matter, you and I saw it. And that for me sums it up. So I'm going to out you now. It's Duncan. You know who you are. And that was a really, really special moment for me. And I won't forget that in a long time. But today, let's move on to the podcast. And today, I'm really excited to be joined by Stuart Foxall, fly angler and tyer of truly amazing flies. He's done so much fishing, so much interesting stuff. There's loads I want to talk to him about. So I'm really excited to be joined by him today. Stuart, how's it going?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Pete. And thanks for the invite.
You are most welcome. And it's been really exciting seeing the pictures. You've been out catching some fish. What have you been up to fishing-wise at the moment?
Well, my last fishing trip was to Scotland, somewhere started fishing quite a bit more the last few years again. So because of COVID, usually I'll go away to BC for the fall fishing. Unfortunately, obviously this year it's been cancelled. So I was lucky enough to get an invite to a good beat with some friends on the River Spey at Delphi, which was pretty mind blowing, really. I have fished there before, but only sort of for the day. This was a week's fishing, which I shared with my mum, because normally I'll take my mum fishing during the fall to BC. So we had 15, 16 fish between us both. So it was really good fishing. But I mean, to be fair, we did catch it just perfect, so or nearly perfect.
Fantastic. And I assume all those fish were caught on your own beautiful flies?
Yes, they were. Yes. There was a bit of leg pulling because I was a bit late to the party. I don't think I'd actually hooked a fish till Wednesday. So they was sort of saying, oh, you need to change what you're doing and change your flies, put some proper flies on. But the two flies that did the damage really was a fly called the Lightning Bolt, which is a design come up by the head gilly at Delphi, Mark Melville, and a fly called the Dorish shrimp, which is commonly known as the shitey whitey. But it's funny because they're both pretty dull patterns. That they're not the normal salmon fly where there's bright colours involved. These are pretty dull. And I think that just worked because instead of a fish seeing the fly from 5 foot away, something like that, they just see it when it's on the nose and just bang at it. So
Interesting. I wanted to come back a little bit because something you said was really interesting, and where you said, it was a few days and people were hooking fish and you weren't getting so lucky. How do you cope with that side of things? So I know as some myself, I'm super relaxed about that stuff and take pleasure in everyone catching fish. But it's kind of an interesting one, isn't it? When people are sort of hauling in fish and you're sitting thinking, well, I think I'm doing everything right. And how was that for you, those moments?
yeah, well, I had 2 rods set up because obviously there was myself and my mum, and I had one set up exactly the way that the gillies had said fish, and then I had another set up the way I thought that I was thinking that I would need to fish, which would be a little bit deeper, cooler water, temperatures dropping. You'd think the fish should go a little bit. So we was mixing and changing it and trying different things, and it still wasn't working. So, but the people that was actually catching was going with what the gilly was saying, more or less, exactly the same. So I just, when that's happening, I think the best way of viewing it, and you've probably been there, that every dog has his day. So you just stick in there, stick with it. It's going to work at some point. And sure enough, when I did finally find a taking fish, as it happened, it dropped off, as you'd expect after wanting the fish. But then the next 5 stuck and I lost another one. So 7 hooked fish in a day, I'd ripped your arm off if you'd have said, oh, you'll hook 7 fish for the week. I'd have hooked your arm off then. So, I think it's having the confidence, and if you're not sure on the river or the river system and what works, listen to the gilly. They are there day in, day out. They know what works. Obviously, if you want to throw a curveball in there and try something different for an hour, do that. I fished a muddler minnow stripped over the top, which has worked this year. That didn't work, which is why I went back to what the gillies were saying. But usually the gillies are right. Stick with it.
I like your style though, setting up the 2 rods, and I like being out in left field a little bit. And of course, would, as you rightly say, take the advice of the gilly. But part of me wants to play a little bit as well and just see. But first day, I guess I'd probably do exactly that and see what happens. But I'm a constant tinkerer and thinking about, right, should I do this? And I remember I fished a Spring Creek in Montana, and I said to the guy, I had a group down there, and I said to the guy, do you ever fish CDC flies on here? He said, no, never. So that was the first one I tied on, and that rare time that it actually worked.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting to tinker with stuff a little bit, and I think you learn a lot that way as well, don't you?
I think the good thing about tinkering, especially as of, for instance, like last week, when there's enough fish about, the fish actually tell you what's working. So you can actually work things out in your head and think, yeah, next time that might work again, or no, it won't. I think the problem with salmon fishing in the UK, as you know, is there's so few fish that sometimes you're trying different things. There might not be a salmon around for a mile away from you, so you don't get the feedback. But certainly when there's enough fish around and you do get feedback, it's worthwhile playing with stuff and trying stuff, new things.
Do you think that is a case then, with fewer fish to play with, that you have to be more innovative more quickly?
Certainly in some places, yeah. It was quite noticeable. That one of the Brits' favourite go-tos at the end of the season is to pull Red Francis on and stick that through a pool. And it was quite noticeable that nobody hooked a fish on a Red Francis, but they'd seen it all the week before, and probably the week before that. So using something slightly different, well, not something slightly different, but something slightly smaller and duller, so that they didn't see the fly too far in advance and it was just on the nose before they saw it. Definitely definitely helped out last week anyway. And it's quite noticeable as well that talking to guys, obviously I get a lot of feedback through tying flies commercially. I get a lot of feedback from guys who are fishing round and about, and most of them at the back end are using smaller and smaller flies.
That's really interesting. And I think when you mentioned smaller flies just a few moments ago as well, that's a confidence thing, isn't it? And it's having the confidence to do that.
Yes, it is a confidence thing, because we tend, especially salmon anglers, we tend to think that we need to use a fly that the fish can see. Sometimes that's not always the best thing, because if a fish sees it from a good enough distance, they'll actually move out the way of what's coming to them. So I think sometimes using smaller flies is definitely a winner, because they just don't have time to think about it. It's either not there, or all of a sudden it's there right in front of the face and they have to take it. I guess it's a bit like trout fishing, you know. I mean, trout are actually eager feeders, and sometimes I just you know, they just switch on to flies of a certain size, and it doesn't actually matter what fly you use, as long as it's the right size. They tend to switch on to smaller food items. It just works sometimes.
Yeah, I know I play with it a little bit, and I've had lighter salmon rods to throw those smaller flies, and really, really enjoyed doing that.
Yeah.
And from what I gather and what I've seen, it does certainly work
I,
as well.
I
It's
I
really,
think one thing about it, you saying using lighter gear, that is one thing that if you're using smaller flies, it's definitely worthwhile buying yourself a lighter rod. If you imagine the old 14 and 15 foot rods that we probably grew up on when we were salmon fishing, and you're using size 14 hooks, most of the fish, to be honest, they're just going to ping out. The
mm.
rod's too strong, it'll pull the hook out. If you have a softer action, smaller, lighter rod, match your equipment to what you're fishing.
And what do you recommend line weight then for lighter salmon fishing?
Well, I was actually using £12 last week, which the gillies didn't particularly like. They like 15. I I also think that if you're using smaller flies, you want a softer leader material so that the fly can actually work more rather than just be stiff. So that's why I used lighter nylon. Uh, we caught we caught more than a third of the fish for the beat, so I'm guessing that something was working. And I would put it down to the nylon, to be honest, more so than the flies.
And what are you using, Stuart?
Just Maxima. I've never had it fail on me. Obviously, it does snap at times, but usually there's a reason. There's a rock involved, or a twig, or just brute force on my part, or bad knot tying. That's happened a few times. But it's reliable. It is reliable. It just works.
That's another confidence thing, isn't it? That if you know it works, you stick with it, don't you? And
Yeah.
you go through spells, don't you? I don't know if you've been the same, that you found upon what really works for you, but there can be times where you're just pinging flies or pinging fish, sorry, and you're thinking it's this, and you stretch it and ping, it goes, and you lose confidence, and you just won't use it, will you?
Well, yeah, but I think sometimes we can overthink things,
Mm.
and I find it's when we start second guessing, that's when problems arise. If you just stick with what you know works for you, and how it works for you, it'll come back, because we all go through little stretches of losing fish for whatever reason. And then you'll go through a run and you won't lose a fish for days, weeks, months, even. So it's just a matter of sticking and trusting with what you do. I also think I've been lucky. Although I've been fly fishing for 40 odd years, I've been lucky in fishing with some amazing guides in America and Canada, which was a real steep learning curve. It saved me hours and days and weeks of fishing on my own and working things out. So I do count myself lucky that I've picked up a lot of good habits and tips through fishing with very talented guys who earn their living through the fishing.
Yeah. I'll put you on the spot a tiny bit here then and say, what advice would you give somebody, just a simple tip, looking to improve their salmon fishing?
I honestly think that the best way of picking tips up and learning quickly is to fish with somebody who is a good angler. I find that there's very few people now who want to keep secrets. You can, years ago that you'd ask people, "What have you caught your fish on?" and they'd hide the fly. I think those sort of days have gone now, and if you ask in the right manner, usually people will try and help you. And most people will probably say, "Tell you what, why don't you come out for a day's fishing?" And even if you don't see a fish, you can still have a great day's fishing. You'll learn a lot. You'll probably have a few laughs along the way, which, let's be honest, that's what we do it for. It's fun. It's not work. And I think that's probably the best and quickest way of getting yourself on that steep learning curve. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle. The more pieces that start to fit, the easier it is to fit all the other pieces in.
That's really cool. That's nice information. You said you were fishing with your mum. So has she been a passionate angler, and did some of that angling come from her to you or the other way around?
Yeah, no, my mum's family always fished coarse fishing. That was fairly well known in course competitions around the West Midlands. So when Dad had never fished, so when they got married, Mum got Dad into fishing, and they used to fish the River Severn for barbel mainly. So when I came along, I started fishing. I caught my first barbel at 4, and funnily enough, Dad used to take us up to Cassous on the Upper Severn up in Wales, and I can remember seeing some old guys fly fishing for salmon. Funnily enough, and that they had a few salmon. And at the time, they used to carry the fish in the old pillowcases. So they opened up the pillowcase, and I was, I don't know, 6 or 7 or something, and they showed me these salmon. So all I kept on about, whatever rod was stuck in my hand, I'd be doing this with it. And Dad was like, "I've got to buy him a bloody fly rod to keep him happy." so that's where it came from. And then Dad died about 15, 16 years ago. So I always try and take Mum out fishing at least 2 times a year somewhere.
And how did that come to Steelhead, taking her to Steelhead? Was that a natural thing, or was it one of those things that you said, "Hey, do you fancy this? I've done a little bit of this." How did that come about?
Well, I've been doing it for a few years, and she realised how much I'd fallen in love with the place because I was just going over to BC as often as I could. And we had a small family business, and when she retired, obviously we had more time. And I decided to sell the business through various reasons, so to give myself more time. So the first opportunity that I had that year was just like, right, there's a gap. Do you fancy coming? And she was like, "Yeah, brilliant." So and you know what steelheading's like. It's a bit hot. It can be hard at times. And I was thinking, right, I hope conditions are going to be good. And just like, yeah. And the first steelhead she caught was within an hour. And I mean, she can cast. She's a good fisherman. And it did exactly what you'd want a steelhead to do. Tore off a couple of 100 yards downstream, cartwheeling, managed to get it back, got a nice photo of this beautiful fish. But I was dry fly fishing, skating dries, and I had 3 that day. Mum had 2 on a tip, and the following day she turned around to the guide and just went, "I don't want that rod. I want to get one on the skater." And I'm like, "Mum, it doesn't happen very often. You'll get far." No, I want to get one on the skater, and she had 2 that day on the skater. So yeah, she absolutely loves steelhead.
And whereabouts was that?
On the Bulkley Canyon. Beautiful stretch of river, beautiful place. I think that's the one thing why I did fall in love with steelhead when I was a kid. I read Roderick Haig-Brown's book and built this picture in my mind just how big and wild and fantastic everything was. And to be honest, when I first fished there, it is exactly as the book describes it. It's spot on, and it just ticked the boxes.
Does that remain your favourite steelhead destination?
It is, yeah. It is. I think on the Skeena system, which obviously people go on about the Skeena, when the Skeena is mentioned but by steelheaders, generally it's the area more so than the river, because the Skeena River, to be honest, is a bit boring. It's that big. You're fishing for moving fish generally. So fish, if the best way of fishing the Skeena would actually be to fish at the top of a riffle on a bar that's a mile long and not move all day. Just keep casting there and wait for fish to come to you. So that's a bit boring. But the whole of the Skeena system, which is about as big as Wales, to give you some idea, the catchment, it gets something like 100,000 steelhead each year. Run it between winter and summer steelhead. The majority is summer steelhead that run, and I think that the Bulkley, they think, gets about 40% of all those fish. So if you was desperate to get a steelhead, the odds would definitely be in your favour to get there between September, October, November.
And the thing to bear in mind, I remember stepping into the Bulkley for the first time, is how cold it can be that time of year as well.
It can be, yeah. I mean, I've fished there and it's been -7, -8, and we've had to snap the boat off the boat launch to get in there. And then come 11 o'clock, something like that, you're in T-shirts.
Yeah. The first day I remember was absolutely freezing. And then it was beautiful from then on and absolutely fabulous. And like you said,
You'd think that cold weather would put fish off, but it doesn't. That they'll still take. Actually, a few years ago in the canyon, we found a pod of fish, and we was fishing either side of this canyon. And actually, in the canyon, because it was that shaded, it was -15.
Wow.
And I was hooking fish, and the reel was just locking up and freezing as I was playing fish. And obviously, I lost a few, but I think we ended up with about 7 from that area before 9 o'clock. And it was freezing. It was cold. But, I mean, you don't feel it when you're catching fish.
And that's part of it, isn't it? For me, the steelhead aspect is you brave out that tough weather for what could almost be seen as the ultimate reward.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And those are the fish you tend to remember.
Yeah. I wanted to come back to skated flies because it's interesting you mentioned that. And I wanted to talk about the crossovers between potentially steelhead and salmon. But wanted to come back to the skated flies thing and wondered if you'd caught many steelhead that way, but also I was reading something the other day, I think it was in Chasing Silver magazine actually, about skating flies for Atlantic salmon as well, and wondered if you'd done much of that and whether it had been successful or not.
Well, yes, I have. Years ago, we were lucky enough to fish a Highland River, and it was a funny setup, really. The hotel used to charge big bucks to fish the lower river, and they had a couple of estate cottages, which weren't the best, but that was clean. And what used to happen was they'd allow us to fish 2 or 3 of the pools on the upper river between 6 at night and 6 in the morning, which is when the clients were back in the hotel having the supper. They also gave us license to fish on a tributary, which was a 2-mile hike into a little canyon. And after they got to know us a bit more, they also said, oh, you can fish up at the lock as well. So no matter what the conditions were on the river, being a small Highland Spate River, you got somewhere where you could catch fish. And one of the things that we used to do there was fish muddler minnows a lot, usually as top dropper, and then just have like a little small point fly on the top. And in fast water, what you could do, they call it dibbling, which was your point fly would obviously sit in the river, in the water, and the current, fishing away as a normal fly would swing. But then you could lead your muddler across and behind little pots and boils, and really work the fly. And in slower water, what you could do was just cast out and strip, and just work that fly over the top so that it was skating. And I mean, it could be deadly. It could be deadly. And funnily enough, this year, I never thought I'd be able to get on the river, because it's that expensive to get on. And I had an invite just when Scotland opened up again from COVID. And the first day there, stripping muddlers, I think I landed five or six I landed, but I probably moved 20, 25 different fish on a muddler. And some of them, it wasn't just like boil, leave, that's it, they've gone. This was like,
Wow.
like Coho, when you see Coho's chasing poppers and they're behind like a koi cart pushing the food along. That's exactly what they were doing. And I had one come up 4 times at the fly in one cast.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's just how aggressive these fish can be. And I tried it, funnily enough, on the River Spey this year on a lower beat. I was asked to turn up on the Wednesday, although I could fish on the Thursday. And they sort of said, oh, while you're here, you might as well have a cast if you want. So I just set up a muddler rod. And the gilly said, well, try it, because nobody fishes the Highland way on a big river like this. And it's a pool called Burke's on Gordon Castle. Lovely pool, right in front of the hut. And first pass down with a strip muddler, I moved 9 different fish. Not one of them touched it, but that boil, bow wave at it, you'll get a lot of bow waves. So it is definitely a technique that's worth having in your box. It's really not used much at all, but it's definitely worth trying. I know Gordon Sim of Loop, the CEO of Loop, he uses it a lot. I think he's had over 200 fish this year. He was asked onto the Clyde, which is obviously a normal big river where you'd swing normally, and people think I'm getting technical if you bounce a Francis through. And it was decided that this muddler Highland technique wouldn't work there, and I think he had 7 on his first day and hooked 5 and landed 3, I think, all on the muddler. So it does work. It's not the answer all of the time. And in all honesty, fishing skated flies for steelhead isn't the answer all of the time. Say that's the window where you can fish, it will work about that much of the actual line. But when it's on, and you'll remember every fish that you hook on the surface as well.
And it comes back to the confidence thing again as well, doesn't it? We were talking about with smaller flies, that even if, because one of the things that always, and I've done a little bit of it, not with success, I have to say, but I've done a little bit, but if nothing else, it tells you that there's some fish about, doesn't it?
Well, that's the one thing about it. It's a bit like stripping a sunray near the surface again. If there's fish there, you'll get to know that there's fish there pretty quickly, and you'll also know if they're on it or not, because within an hour you should have a fish on the bank. If you don't have a fish on the bank in an hour, or you haven't had any boils or anything, they're going to be lower down. So just put a tip on and fish slightly lower down with what you normally would. On the Highlands, it probably is a go-to technique to try first off for me, for the simple reason I enjoy fishing that way. Does it account for catching more fish by doing that? Probably not. I suspect it has got a habit of knocking fish down as well if they're not into it. So don't go into it straight away and think, oh, I'm on the river, what shall I do? I'll stick a muddler on, I'll try it straight away, because you could ruin the pool for the rest of the day. But certainly if you've tried it and nothing's worked, it's a good backup plan to give it a go and see what happens.
Really interesting. And so with the steelhead then, was it transferable? Have you tried, because it was minnows, muddler minnows, they were fishing first, I think, weren't they, as almost a surface fly
Well,
early on?
yeah, that was
With
caddis
caddis.
patterns really. They very slim, trimmed muddler minnow type caddis patterns that don't actually sit on top of the surface. They tend to sit in the surface. So we call the trout fishing, we call them emergers. Well, you know the difference between fishing a dry fly and an emerger, and what a difference it can make in catch relations. Exactly the same with the steelhead. And as soon as I started doing it, I cottoned onto it really quick. A lot of the steelheaders use quite big, bulky, foamy flies, and you certainly get a lot of interest in those flies. But you'd notice that even if you was hooking fish and landing them, they'd just be pinned somewhere around here. I think I was that bulky that when the fish was coming up, I was actually pushing the fly away. I was bumping the fly. So the smaller the fly you could get and actually get it to sit in the surface instead of on top, I would say probably double the amount of fish hookups you get and landed fish.
Interesting.
And it's much. I personally think, although I've not fished in East Canada, once again, Gordon Sim, I tied some of these muddlers for him some time ago when he was going over there to fish on the rivers over there, and he was definitely landing a lot more fish by using muddlers to dead drift bombers, for the simple reason fish couldn't bump the fly away.
Interesting. So having a foot in the steelhead camp and the salmon camp, are there techniques that are interchangeable that you have taken from steelhead to salmon and salmon to steelhead?
Definitely, yes. When I was watching some of the steelheaders, because, and you've probably noticed, they have got a habit of casting very square, which I notice what that tends to do is when they're using tips, which is why they cast square, it's perfect. It really works well, and you can see why they do it. The downside to it is when they're fishing skated flies is because they're casting square, instead of getting the nice slow drift like that, which you'd expect a caddis to sort of do, what I was doing again, this. So even if fish was interested, I've seen fish, steelhead, actually chase the fly like that, tail walking like a tarpon, chasing the fly, and couldn't get anywhere near it. And it was that desperate to get at the fly. So certainly for me, casting more downstream, controlling a nice slow swing, definitely helped me catch a lot more steelhead. Equally, as salmon anglers, we have this notion in our heads, even when guys are using Skagit heads now, we tend to cast at this 45-degree angle all the time. And we're not actually letting our fly go down anywhere near as deep as we think we are. You need to cast square, put that mend in, let the line go slack, let that tick and fly get down, then tighten up on it. Set that fly up for 5 or 10 seconds before you're actually fishing. And as soon as that fly is under tension and starts to swing, instead of like going like this across, it'll be down and getting down to where those fish are. It really makes a big difference.
I found on our river that when it's big, particularly or very early season, I fish Skagit heads. Do you fish them over here for salmon too?
I do, yeah. I do,
Yeah.
yeah. They're really. I know people say they can be clumpy and a bit splashy. Personally, I don't think they are. I think it depends on whose hands they're in. There's a lot that's probably not understood over here about Skagit and actually works, because I mean it is a pretty simple formula and simple way to fish. But I mean it's a cracking way of. I'm sure on the small rivers that you're in, where there's trees, etc., you haven't got the big D loop, so you can get casts out. Let's be honest, most of the time we're casting 50, 60 plus feet away. I don't think they're a splash by your feet pulling the fish off at all, especially spring fish or high water fish. So when it's done correctly, it's definitely a technique I use.
Yeah. And I've caught salmon here on intruders as well, and we'll fish those as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What I wanted to talk to you about was, funnily enough, when we were over in BC, that Duncan and I had a day with Denise, and there was a chap there in the car. We were actually with a different guide. He'd booked her for a number of days, and we went self-guided and treated ourselves to one day.
Yeah.
And he was a chap who fished the Tweed and had obviously decided that the fish weren't there in the same numbers, so he was going for steelhead.
Yeah.
But in this season, do you detect there is more of an improvement in salmon runs in Scotland as a whole, or generally? That's a sweeping statement, I know, but let's say the Spey, for example.
Definitely, I think that there's more fish around this year, or appears to be more fish around. I'm of the very strong opinion that fish are much easier to catch if they're not being fished for every day. And I think a lot of our rivers, some of the beats are viewed as assets by the landowners, and they are. They are. So they want to get in as many anglers as they can, fishing as often as they can, to get fish, simply so that their asset maintains its value. Do I think that having more anglers equates to more fish? I don't think it does. I think it actually works in the opposite direction. I think that if a lot of these beats perhaps had 2 or 3 anglers on a 2-mile stretch, they'd probably end up with a lot more fish. And I think that's what's actually happened this year. There's lots of stories of people getting 10, 12 fish a day, and they're the only anglers fishing, as opposed to a 3 or 4 man beat where everybody would probably get 2 fish. These pools need to be rested. The fish are comfortable when they're rested. They're more inquisitive when they've been rested. If they keep on seeing things being splashed and put through them all day, they know you're there. We tend to think that they haven't got a clue, but they know you're there.
And do you think those fewer anglers catching the more fish is a function of perhaps some of the anglers who have felt that it's a bit more difficult and go to different pastures to catch fish? So they're not fishing, but you're getting that as a result, fewer anglers as a result of that others have drifted away to other places, be it steelhead or whatever.
Well, I think certainly COVID's had its part to play this year, because only certain anglers could get onto certain stretches of rivers. I know that when, as for instance, on the River Wye, which is fairly close to me, it's a couple of hours drive to fish. Some of the lower beats below Monmouth. At one point, you could fish in England, but not fish in Wales unless you live 2 or 3 miles away from the fishing. Well, there was a Welsh guy who could walk to the beat and fish. I think he went 20 odd days every day having a fish. Which, now I could probably guarantee you that if it was the normal syndicate that was on and there was 3 anglers fishing that beat, I bet you they wouldn't have had a fish every day. And I think it's just this year we've seen the effects that resting pools, and you've probably seen it. It's not just salmon; it happens with trout. People are a bit guarded on where they're catching trout or grayling, because they know it can only take X amount of pressure. And if you have a decent angler go in every week and hit the same fish, you know full well that stretch of river is not going to fish as well the following year or a month later or whatever. So people are guarded about it. And I think we need to be, really, because I think you'll probably agree with me on this. Anglers are better now. Techniques are better now than they ever have been. The fish haven't got that many places where they're actually safe and secure.
That's one of the interesting things, actually. I was going to say in the introduction, with even my trout fishing coming into grayling, and that's really, I think I've touched on it on previous podcasts, so apologies if I have. But you do have a situation where the fish have got nowhere to hide, have they? We can reach, and I'm talking more trout and grayling now, I guess,
Yeah,
but also that's pertinent with salmon as well,
yeah,
that we can get to them at any stage in the water column. And it's been something I've been thinking about a lot, and whether I want to chase fish, let them have a little bit more of a chance, so that it's sporting. And I fished the other day, and I was invited to go and fish down the line a little bit, and there was some grayling there, and I thought I'd really like to, because I don't have grayling in my home river. I always like to try and catch those.
yeah,
And I thought, well, I could set the nymph rod up, and I thought, sod it, I don't want to do that. And it was only a choice of that more than anything else. But I stuck an indicator on. I hadn't done it for 10, 15 years. Had a couple of nymphs. Sometimes I didn't. I just watched the line upstream, and I had an absolute ball
yeah,
and enjoyed every second of it. And it was really, really good fun.
yeah.
And I caught a few fish. I was perfectly happy. And you're dead right what you're saying, that there aren't so many places now, are there, that fish
There's,
can go hide?
there's not. It's a real interesting conversation, and I do think it's important. I think there's a number of younger anglers who, we're at a certain age where we've probably caught enough fish where we don't feel as though we need to catch every fish in the river. So, we might be happy with one or two fish, and then, I don't know, have a coffee, have a chat for an hour, and then go back to it. There's some guys who fish hard. They want to catch every fish in the river. Is it wrong? Probably not, because if we were at their age, we'd be doing the same. And you get to the point where everybody starts off, they want to catch a fish, then they want to catch every fish they can, and then you get to the stage where you think, oh, I wouldn't mind getting one or two big fish, and you'll forgo such a numbers day. And then after that, you just go out for a day's fishing and a bit of fun. I think I'm at that stage. It looks as if you're probably at that stage. But should we shout and dictate to some of the younger guys, actually, you're doing a bit of harm here on the fish? It's probably a bit fuddy-duddy, and we shouldn't be doing it. But I think it is important to discuss it. That I think they do need to know that they could actually be harming their own rivers. And I think this is part of the reason why you see some guys, they'll hit the river hard for 1 or 2 years, and then all of a sudden you'll see that they've had to move on somewhere and go somewhere else. And it's because the fish have cottoned on to exactly what's happening. They're harder to catch. Let's be honest, some of the bigger fish do struggle with stress more than smaller fish once they've been hooked and landed and handled. So they're probably not as hungry or eager to feed as they used to be. And then all of a sudden everybody's moaning, oh, this river's not as good as it used to be. It's nowhere near as good. And are there factors like farming or pesticides involved or whatever, or is it just angling pressure? And I think angling pressure has to be taken into account. We can't just ignore it and say it doesn't have an issue, because it probably does.
Hmm. And I think, like you rightly say, it's not preaching from a pulpit. You must do it's. I think it is, and I've touched on it before in podcasts, that it's maturity as you get older, um, and so you just don't need to catch them all. And I remember the last fish. I didn't even fish the last day of the season. I ended how I tried to start, waiting for a fish to rise to cover it. My last fish was a sea trout that happened to rise once or twice, and I caught it. And I thought, do you know what? That's enough. And the other one, I always am at pains to say as well, that not everyone is fishing as many days as perhaps you or I may be fishing.
Yeah,
So they want to catch a few fish. So it is, I suppose it's a luxury that we get to fish a bit, that you can sit and say, right, okay, I'm going to do that. And sod it, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And like you say, with perhaps where you mentioned younger anglers, that spell goes away eventually, doesn't it?
Yes.
It's gone with us. So
Yeah.
I suppose that's part of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I suppose the techniques and the equipment has taken that on just a little bit more from when we were catching them and
Well,
wanting to catch a lot of fish, I guess.
I think as well, years ago, you'd learn things by reading. I mean, I was never fortunate enough as a kid up until I was probably in my late 30s to go anywhere where there was a gilly or I mean, when we were kids, there was no such thing as a guide either. So the only way you could learn was magazines or books, which is fine. You do get some knowledge by doing that, but it's not actually learnt on the river, and you don't see it properly. So you have to put a certain amount of time into it to learn that technique, and then it's like, oh yeah, that's right. I've read that right, and yeah, I've now applied it, and it does work. And you then start to form this picture in your mind when that will work and how it works. I think nowadays, with the likes of YouTube, etc., you can actually see somebody do it and show. You can see how it works. So you've got people that have gone from probably never picked up a fly rod to being an excellent angler within 2 years or 3 years, if they want to really throw the time into it. And they haven't actually had to work that hard for some of their information. So they lose some of the fundamentals, which are important as part of our sport and passion. Uh, and they'll get it. They will get it in time. But I think their fishing is probably progressing a lot faster than their actual knowledge of why we're doing it. I mean, I don't know if you ever ask anybody, do you know what the reason is for catch and release? Why did we bring in catch and release? And you'll be amazed how many people will immediately say, oh, it's so we can catch them again.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the actual reason why we started catch and release. It's to keep the fish safe enough so that they can spawn, so that there's a future, so that our kids can fish and their kids can fish. And we've lost that. We have lost that germ, that little cell to grow. The reason why we brought in catch and release.
Do you think that was because in the days where we'd started doing it, it was almost a naivety because you couldn't access information, as you say, as easily, so that you sort of waited for a magazine to come out, you waited for a book to be published, and that's how, and sort of you learnt as you went along. Whereas now you can get that information, as you rightly say, with a click of a button or on your phone or wherever it is. It can be that curve, as you said, happens so much more quickly now, doesn't it?
It does. It
Mm.
does. And I mean, let's be honest. When you're eager, you do want to catch every fish in the river. We've all been there where you see your rise, so you go charging up the river quarter of a mile, start casting at it, and then the place you've just left, you see another fish rise, so you can charge in down there. We've all been there. I think now though, because people just starting fishing with that eagerness are so good compared to what we were like. Uh, that they are catching most of the fish that they see rise, whereas we wouldn't.
Mm.
And I think tackle has a lot to do with that as well. When I was a kid, if you was wet fly fishing, you'd just use a team of 3 spiders. That was it. That's the only way that you'd fish, really. You might have a Kites Imperial as your dry fly or something like that. So you might get the odd dry fly fish. Now there's this multitude of different equipment and different fly lines. The flies obviously are a lot more advanced, so make life easier. So I think some of these fish probably do get caught a lot more than we think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really interesting rabbit hole to go down, isn't it? But it's great that there's young people out fishing,
Yeah,
and it's lovely seeing those things on social media, these, you know, people catching fish in lots of places and doing an awesome job. So, and I think the important thing is we're all on the same team, aren't we?
Exactly, yeah. And as long as because I think sometimes if you do moan about it, you can be described as a moaning old fart because you're not catching as many. Fair enough comment. But I think what we need to do is pull together for the sake of the fish. The fish are the priority. It's not egos. It's not catching all the time. We can still have a good day's fishing without actually catching a fish. We can have some laughs. So I think that's the main thing to remember about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's move on from there and on to your flies, which are magnificent. And I've bought some and I've caught fish on them as well. How did that come about, and how did it come about in a commercial way?
Well, when I'd probably be about 6, and I was taking hooks out of my dad's coarse fishing box or wicker basket. You remember the old wicker basket, Sam? So I'd take the hooks out of his wicker basket. I was getting cotton out of my mum's sewing kit and feathers out of a pillow, and I was just whipping them on or wrapping them on, and then they'd fall off. So Dad decided to buy me a Turrell's fly tying kit for Christmas that year. So they came with a little card that showed you how to, in diagrams, which actually, to begin with, I think the little card system is far better than watching films because you can do it step by step and at your own pace. Whereas with a film, you can tend to rush. But that's how I taught myself. And as I said, we had a small family business, and I played professional football for a bit and then went semi-pro.
Wow.
So mum and dad used to go up to Scotland 5-6 times a year. I couldn't go up there because I'd be playing football, unfortunately. So the best way of me getting a kick out of my fishing was by fly tying. And being in the West Midlands, as you know, there's not really that many good rivers around closely. So if I fancied an odd hours fishing, you can't do it round here. It's a day or nothing. It's a day's trip. So I just used to concentrate on my fly time. And that's why I got half decent at it, really, was because I just tie that many bloody flies. There's just boxes and boxes of them. From there, going commercially into it, I got diagnosed with cancer about 15 years ago, and I happened to go on trip of a lifetime, which was BC. As it happened, I fell in love with it, so continued to go back over there. But part of the reason behind that was some of the guys over there saw my flies, and obviously they'd never seen European style flies, so I just started selling them over there in tube flies, because tube flies was something that they'd never seen. Everything that they was doing was intruder shanks, and I could see the benefit of the tube system, which I think is better all round. So I started to sell flies, and as soon as I got like £1,000 or whatever, I'd be booking a cheapo flight over there, bumming around. I've slept on mates' sofas to go fishing, and they'd lend me the car for the week and that sort of stuff. And I think that's why some of the BC steelhead guides over there took me to heart, really, because I could see just how much it meant to me. And secondly, I was prepared to work it out for myself as well. It wasn't just, here's some money, take me out guiding, I want to know where the fish are. I'd actually have a number of days out on my own, walking around, bushwhacking, taking the chance of walking into a bear, just for the sake of hopefully getting one of these fish, just to hold it for that few seconds before putting it back. which seems ridiculous, really, but they took me to heart, and I think because of that, they started to give me more and more information. And from there, some of my designs got a bit of recognition and got known. So I was approached by a company called Aquaflies, owned by Doug. And Aquaflies had a number of my designs that they now sell commercially over in America and British Columbia. So that's worked out great. We've won a couple of awards for some of the designs and the quality of the flies over there. So it's from somebody who was just doing it as a bit of a hobby to actually earn a bit of pocket money and actually put that towards even more fishing, for me, was just ideal. Brilliant.
I see, when I see your flies on social media, they're beautifully photographed, obviously beautifully tied. They have more of a salmon steelhead bent to them. Is that a function of orders, or do you tie trout ones too? Or would you see yourself as a specialist more so towards salmon and steelhead flies?
I think I'm known a lot more for salmon and steelhead and sea trout flies. As it happens, and you'll probably know this as well, I'll probably tie more trout flies for myself for the simple reason that I lose so many. Jigging and going trout fishing in little streams, most of the flies end up in trees or on the bottom. So I do actually do a lot more flies for myself, trout wise and grayling wise. But everything that I sell really is salmon based and steelhead based, and it's all through word of mouth, really. Friends of friends, and it's the confidence thing. Are my flies any more likely to catch than a commercially tied one? Probably not, no. But I think it's just that confidence, and if it looks pretty fly, not so pretty, put the pretty fly on. Of course, it's going to catch because it's the one you're fishing with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they are stunning, and as I said, they've worked for me, and I've caught fish on them. So thank you for those.
No money back guarantee.
What about the ones stuck in the rocks and trees?
I thought so. No.
I've got a list of those ones for you. It comes the way that you speak about fishing and your knowledge of fishing comes as little surprise to me that you've worked as consultants for Loop and other companies with rod design and fly line design. How did that sort of come about? Was that a function of being on the river and a lot? And how did that work?
I was actually approached by Loop. They'd obviously seen my flies, and that I was thinking about. About some fly tying materials, so they sort of asked me on board. And at first, what they sort of did, they'd also heard that where I was going, Stu's catching quite a lot of fish, and I think the traction behind getting a reputation for catching fish tends to snowball, doesn't it? You might not actually be catching any more fish. It just somebody tells somebody, and it sort of snowballs for whatever reason. So that they asked me to get it on board, and within a year or two, because they was asking for comments on the tackle that they got, and usually the comments that I was coming out with were, they would find 6 months, 12 months down the line that what I was saying was probably true. That's when they started to ask, well, the American market so well, can you help Klaus on his NXT, which was mainly biased towards Skagit casting as opposed to Scandi. So I helped on that. Then they wanted a Skagit line to go in with the SDS system. So we did that pretty quickly as well. So it's just through word of mouth, and I was quite surprised how some of the companies get proper designers in who don't actually fish that much. So some of their ideas probably sound great on paper, but we will know by spending time on the river that it won't actually work. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Some things work because they've worked for hundreds of years. And perhaps we might need a new material to make that product. That might improve it, but that's all that we sometimes need to do. We don't need to over-engineer things. It's like cars, isn't it? That the more fancy they get, actually, the more items I've got going wrong with them because there's more to go wrong with them. So,
yeah, but that was a fun process, and you enjoyed that, and
definitely, yeah, it's really I was very nervous, and I must thank Ian Fairgrieve, to be honest, because he gave me the belief that I could actually do it. And he just basically said, Stu, you do what you think is right. And he said, the worst thing that can happen is it won't work. And we'll either have to do it again or we won't ask you to get involved again. So, and that was the worst case scenario, you know. And as it happened, the first line design that I come out with, everybody absolutely loved it. And it just went into production.
fantastic. And you're loving fishing as much as you always have you? Are you?
Yes, I am. I think now it's more of a social thing. Years ago, I'd go out fishing on my own, but like you were saying earlier, and you'd enjoy fishing on your own. Over the last few years, I've really enjoyed fishing with other people, sharing moments on the river together, having laughs together, taking the mick out of each other's a good thing to do, I think, because it does keep you balanced. You can't get carried away thinking that you're the world's best at fishing, which I think is always good if you fall flat on your face every now and again.
Yeah.
So that's why I enjoy it.
Yeah, brilliant. And very importantly, how's your health?
It's fine now, yeah. It's great,
Good.
thank you. Yeah.
Good, fantastic. So you're a really well-traveled angler. Is there somewhere that you haven't fished that you thought, actually, yeah, I'd really like to?
I would love to go to Russia, I think, salmon fishing. Just to see perhaps the Pinoy. I know the Pinoy gets numbers as opposed to size of fish, but I think it would be nice just to see a fishery that hasn't been sport too much, Atlantic salmon wise, and you know, I know when you say expect to catch big numbers of fish, it's a bad thing to say, but it would be nice to go somewhere where you could actually expect to hook a fish every day, as opposed to hope to catch a fish every day. So that would be probably on my bucket list.
And I think from that point of view as well, with those sorts of fish, it sounds as though we're similar sort of anglers. That gives you the opportunity to tinker a little bit with the fishing as well, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I've been really lucky. I help a company called Daniki in Alaska, and they've got a river there called the Connectoc. It's an amazing fishery. It really is just an amazing fishery. We go. I do 2 weeks for them. I help guys with the casting, including some of the guides, because obviously you can imagine that they get some trout guides up there who've never picked up a double-handed rod, fishing for king salmon Chinooks. Some of these fish run to £50 plus on this particular river. So I help them with that. Also, we fish low down on incoming and outgoing tides. Well, after a certain amount of years, we noticed that when the locals had done the netting, that especially on a high tide, we noticed that the Chinook appeared to be on the top of the net. And what was happening was, you can imagine the rivers coming down and they have massive tides. The tide was coming in. There'd always be one or two pools where there was no flow at all. And the fish, and considering this river gets between 5 to 12,000 salmon each tide coming through the species, through all the different species, it was just like a big fish pond because there's no flow. They didn't know where to go. and you could see them swimming around.
Wow.
So you know what the usual technique for fishing for kings is: Skagit, T14, T17, real heavy stuff, T20, big flies, and casting out and getting into these deep troughs. What we were doing, tinkering around, playing and thinking about it, was mow tips with 2.5 feet of medium sink. So you're just getting it down. I was tying booby tubes, so quite a bit of foam and deer hair just to keep that fly buoyant, casting as far as you could. And the tip would just, as you stripped, the fly would come down and then just come up to the top, and you'd fish it like a booby. And you could pull in, you'd never get one fish come after your fly. That'd break off in a pack and you'd get like 3 or 5. And these fish were like 20 to 40 pounds. And you could see them bow waving after you fly them. And as soon as you hook one, because you've got nylon running line, it would be like tarpon jumping away, and you've seen the line sort of, and it would catch you on the ear or on your cap, or all this sort of shenanigans. So you'd only probably land one fish, to be honest. You'd pull a load, but you'd probably only land one fish in your 1 hour of the tide where it was doable. But I mean, it was fantastic to see and do, and you always remember those fish. But you would have to allocate probably half an hour to wait for the tide to come in, and then half an hour after. So you'd probably waste 2 or 3 hours of your day just for 1 hour's fishing, really. But I mean, it was worth it. And of course, it's now something that we get clients to do. And it's funny because you'll see some people who are up for it, and other people just haven't got the patience. They won't even wait to see if it's going to happen. But fishing's a different thing to different people. And we just enjoy playing with it and trying different stuff.
Yeah, you could sign me up if I were out there. I tell you, I'd be all over that. That's fantastic. Brilliant. Well, we've spoken for over an hour now, and it's been fantastic. We covered lots, and it's been really interesting to be able to pick your brains. How can people, and I do strongly recommend them, if they wanted to get hold of you and get hold of some of the flies, how can people get hold of you?
The best way would just be either through social media. I'm on Instagram as Stuart Foxall, and I'm on Facebook as Stuart Foxall. Alternatively, just email me, which is Stuart, Stuart, Foxall, Foxall, at hotmail.co.uk. And that can get flies that way, no problem. I think the one thing about commercial tide flies, as opposed to flies that I would tie, is commercial tide flies. Actually, when we look at commercial tide flies, we would actually say, they seem a bit heavily dressed. There is a reason to that they actually sell better. So that's why they're tied that way. As we probably know, less flies are addressed a bit more slimly, actually fish a bit better, and you'll probably catch a few more fish because of that. So we can actually, if you approach me, I could have a discussion with you and tie flies exactly how you would want your flies tied. Some people like them tied a little bit longer with a long tail. Some people are nervous about fish nipping at the tail, so I can tie them shorter. Some people want them very sparse. Other people want them tied fat because they might be fishing fast water, so they want a fly with a bit more presence. So the one good thing about commission flies is you can have them tied exactly how you would want them.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, everyone, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast as much as me. Stuart, I'd like to thank you so much for taking up the time to talk to me today.
No, thank you. Enjoyed it. Thank you, Pete.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one. We've got lots more coming very, very soon. Thanks for listening.